Sometimes, the strongest marriages look perfect from the outside. People see the smiles, the gestures of affection, the way a couple completes each other's sentences, and they believe it's unshakable. That was what everyone thought about my marriage. Friends often said we were the couple they looked up to. I believed it too, for a long time. My husband was gentle, reliable, and devoted in a way that made me feel secure. He never forgot anniversaries, he would check on me in the middle of his busy day, and even in silence, there was comfort between us. Our mornings began with small rituals. Coffee he brewed before leaving for work, a note he would sometimes leave on the kitchen counter, a smile across the table that didn't require words. It wasn't grand gestures, but the kind of everyday consistency that makes love feel timeless. In the evenings, he came home tired yet always willing to listen, to ask about my day, and to share the little things that happened at work. I felt cared for, chosen, protected. We had built years of memories, laughter-filled dinners, and quiet moments that felt unbreakable. Yet perfection has cracks, the kind you only notice when you're searching for them. There were times when I caught myself staring at him, realizing that while he was entirely present, a small part of me was drifting somewhere else. I would dismiss it quickly, telling myself it was normal, that comfort sometimes dulls excitement. But the thought returned more than once, like a whisper I couldn't silence. He noticed small changes too, how sometimes I was distracted in the middle of a conversation, how my laughter didn't come as easily, how I lingered a little too long on my phone. He didn't confront me, though. Instead, he trusted me the way he always had, offering patience instead of suspicion. We had friends, gatherings, events that filled our weekends. And it was in these moments, surrounded by familiar faces, that temptation quietly waited. A laugh shared with someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a look held just a little longer than it should have been, a conversation that stirred emotions I hadn't felt in a while. They were tiny things, almost invisible, yet they planted something dangerous inside me. I didn't act on it, not then. But it was enough to awaken questions I had never asked myself before. Was my love still enough? Was I still the same woman I used to be when I first fell in love with him? And why, despite everything good, was there a space inside me that felt hollow? I never voiced these questions. Instead, I smiled, carried on, and convinced myself that everyone feels this way at some point in marriage. But unease has a way of growing. One moment you think it's nothing, and the next it's shaping your choices, steering you toward something you don't fully understand. I told myself that I was happy, that our life together was steady, strong, and enviable. Yet deep down, I knew something inside me was shifting. A part of me, small but restless, was searching for something beyond what I already had. And it was this restlessness that led me to a single step I could never take back. One decision, one night, that would transform everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and marriage. It began with something so small that I almost convinced myself it was harmless. A message, simple and casual, from someone I had once known. We hadn't spoken in years, but seeing their name light up my phone stirred something unfamiliar. I told myself it was innocent, just catching up, nothing more. But the truth was, even in that first reply, a door had opened. Our conversations grew quickly, moving from polite updates to deeper exchanges. We spoke about things I hadn't shared with anyone in a long time, the frustrations I kept hidden, the doubts I buried, even the silly dreams I no longer voiced. His words reminded me of a version of myself I thought I had outgrown. He listened differently, laughed in ways that pulled me back to a younger self. I felt seen in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. It wasn't that my husband didn't care, he always had. But routine can numb even the most tender love, and I had let it. This new attention felt electric. Every vibration of my phone became a secret thrill. I justified it, telling myself it was just conversation, nothing dangerous. Yet every exchange blurred the lines a little more. A compliment held longer than necessary, a memory shared that carried warmth, a question that dipped too far into the personal. I knew I was treading where I shouldn't, but I didn't stop. The first time we met again in person, it felt surreal. Familiarity mixed with novelty, comfort entangled with excitement. I told myself it was just a quick coffee, a harmless reunion. But the way his eyes lingered, the way my heart raced, said otherwise. The hug lasted longer than it should have, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark I couldn't ignore. I returned home shaken, guilty, yet secretly alive. The step that followed was inevitable. One night, under the guise of a simple meeting, everything changed. I had promised myself I wouldn't cross the line, but when we were alone, silence spoke louder than words. A single moment of weakness, his hand brushing against mine, the way I didn't pull away, the closeness that followed, it shattered every boundary I had lived by. I told myself it would be only once, that no one would ever know, that I could lock it away and return to my life unchanged. But even as it was happening, I knew those lies were fragile. Afterward, the weight of what I had done pressed heavily on me. I lay awake that night, listening to the steady breathing of my husband beside me, realizing I had betrayed not just him but everything we had built. Guilt wrapped around me like a chain, yet tangled in it was the undeniable memory of how alive I had felt. It was both intoxicating and sickening, a contradiction I couldn't untangle. I convinced myself again that it was a mistake I wouldn't repeat, that it had been a lapse in judgment, nothing more. But temptation doesn't end with one night. Once the line has been crossed, it no longer exists, and the forbidden becomes easier to reach for. The very thing I thought I could control now controlled me. Every secret message, every hidden call, every stolen moment became proof of how far I had stepped from the life I once knew. I told myself it was still manageable, that as long as no one found out, my marriage could remain untouched. But deep inside, I knew the truth. Nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after should have been ordinary, but it wasn't. I woke up next to my husband, watching the familiar comfort of his face as he slept, and all I felt was a hollow ache. He reached for me, smiling the way he always did, unaware that everything had shifted. His warmth should have soothed me, but instead it pierced me with guilt so sharp I could barely breathe. I kissed him back, forcing normalcy, praying he wouldn't see through the tremor in my hands. At first, I told myself I could compartmentalize. One night tucked away, a secret I would carry alone. But secrets rarely stay quiet. They bleed into the smallest corners of life. My laughter became thinner, my excuses more frequent, my phone a constant source of fear and temptation. I caught myself checking it at odd hours, deleting conversations, jumping at every notification as if it were a loaded weapon. My husband noticed the subtle changes, the way I clutched my phone closer, the hesitation before answering simple questions. He never accused me. He trusted me too much, and that trust felt heavier than any suspicion could. I tried to cover the cracks with overcompensation. I cooked his favorite meals, showered him with sudden affection, smiled brighter than I felt. But those gestures weren't love, they were desperate attempts to erase the guilt gnawing inside me. And he could sense it. The intimacy between us began to change. He held me, but I stiffened. He spoke, but I was distracted. Arguments surfaced over trivial things, what show to watch, why I seemed distant, why my eyes no longer lit up in the same way. He didn't know the reason, but he could feel the shift. The weight of deception grew unbearable. Nights became a battlefield in my mind. Lying next to him, I replayed every choice I had made, every moment I should have stopped but didn't. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it was filled with restless dreams where truth slipped out and consequences came crashing down. I woke in sweats, sometimes startled by the fear that he already knew. And yet, the pull of temptation remained. The very thing that destroyed my peace was the same thing I couldn't fully let go of. A message from him would ignite my pulse, a brief meeting would erase the guilt for a fleeting moment, and I would surrender again, knowing each step buried me deeper. It was a cycle of desire and regret, a storm I had willingly walked into. My marriage, once steady and comforting, became fragile in ways I couldn't admit out loud. My husband's gaze lingered longer, as though he was searching for answers I refused to give. Sometimes he asked directly, "Is something wrong?" and I lied with practiced ease, saying I was just tired, stressed, distracted. Each lie carved another distance between us, a chasm I no longer knew how to cross. The guilt began to show in ways I couldn't hide. My patience thinned, my mood swung unpredictably, my eyes betrayed a restlessness I couldn't explain. He responded with confusion, frustration, and then silence. The silence was the worst. It was heavy, filled with unspoken suspicions, unasked questions, and the quiet ache of a love beginning to fade. I wanted to stop, to confess, to beg for forgiveness before it was too late. But fear chained my words. Fear of losing him, fear of shattering the life we had built, fear of admitting that I had already broken it with my own hands. I lived in that prison of silence, torn between the life I had and the secrets I carried. But secrets, no matter how carefully hidden, have a way of surfacing. And mine was inching closer to the light, ready to destroy everything I had once held sacred. The truth didn't explode all at once. It unraveled slowly, like a thread pulled from a tightly woven fabric. My husband had been watching me carefully, silently piecing together the fragments of my inconsistencies. The late replies, the sudden absences, the way my eyes shifted when he asked simple questions. He hadn't wanted to believe it. He had wanted to trust the woman he thought he knew. But trust only stretches so far before it finally tears. The night it happened, he found what I had worked so desperately to hide. A message I had forgotten to delete, a line too intimate to be explained away. I saw the change in his eyes before he spoke. He held my phone in his hand, his voice trembling not with rage but with heartbreak. "How long?" That was all he asked. Just 2 words, yet they shattered me more than any anger ever could. I tried to speak, but the truth weighed too heavily. My lips trembled with excuses I couldn't force out. Silence became my only confession. He sat down, staring at me as though he was looking at a stranger. His eyes, once filled with warmth, now carried a pain I had never seen before. It was the kind of pain that comes when the person you trust most becomes the one who wounds you deepest. The confrontation that followed was raw. I begged, I cried, I said it was a mistake, just one night, that it meant nothing. But each word sounded hollow even to me. He listened, but his face remained broken, disbelief etched into every line. "Nothing," he repeated, his voice cracking. "You destroyed everything we built, for nothing?" There was no defense strong enough to heal what I had done. I had taken years of love, loyalty, and devotion and crushed them in a moment of weakness. I had turned our marriage into a lie he never deserved to live in. The days that followed were suffocating. He barely spoke, moving around the house like a ghost, avoiding my touch, my eyes, my presence. I reached for him, but he pulled away. I tried to explain, but explanations are useless when the damage is already carved deep. The silence between us was colder than any argument could have been. And yet, beneath his anger and sorrow, I could still feel the love that had once held us together. That was the cruelest part. He hadn't stopped loving me, and I hadn't stopped loving him. But love wasn't enough anymore. It couldn't erase betrayal. It couldn't rewrite what had been done. When we finally spoke again, it wasn't shouting or blaming. It was quiet, tired, heavy. He told me he didn't know if he could ever look at me the same way, if trust could ever return, if forgiveness was even possible. His voice shook, but he held back tears. I broke down in front of him, admitting every detail, every lie, every fear. It was the most painful honesty I had ever given, and it came far too late. The decision was his to make, not mine. And whether he chose to stay or to walk away, I knew our marriage would never be untouched again. A single step had rewritten the story of our lives. One night had transformed love into something fragile, scarred, and uncertain. In the end, I learned that betrayal doesn't just break the person you hurt, it breaks you too. It leaves a shadow that never truly fades. Love, no matter how deep, is delicate. And once trust is shattered, even if forgiveness comes, the cracks remain forever. A single step changed it all, and one night transformed my marriage. Nothing would ever be the same again.